That's a $1,000,000 question. And I can't emphasize that anymore because most people, they think that there are select individuals that can do it and they cannot. And that's what needs to be shattered as an illusion. And that's part of what I feel has been creating the split in this world. That the way civilization has been set up is to separate people from their innate power and the power of their consciousness. Because if all would simultaneously wake up to the power of their awareness, their free will, their ability to change what they feel can't be changed, it would be the disruptive kind of nuclear bomb to set the collective free. Everyone would choose differently that isn't experiencing the bliss state of freedom and love and unity. And so at the same time, a lot of people aren't choosing that because they're afraid to, or they think that they aren't ready. So if we were to red pill ourselves into creating that opportunity, it comes down to that, to realizing that that's why you're here. And if you're suffering, you're literally just depriving yourself of the opportunity that you signed up for and created for yourself.
Gabi Kovalenko, welcome back on Just Tap In. What are you most excited about right now in your life?
Wow, I knew this question was coming because I was here for the first time you asked me. So I thought about it because lately I'd say I've experienced so much excitement to get to the point where I'm at right now, which is such a feeling of profound flow and embodiment of the stream of consciousness, that every moment is an exciting one. Every day there's always a new experience, something entering the field, something new to explore, and I'm always overcome by intellectual curiosity and this profound passion to do the work that I do. So I'd say it's exciting just to experience what is the next thing that consciousness wants me to experience through that lens of pure embodiment and just allowing myself to be the vessel. And so really, life is exciting. It's just a beautiful consciousness experiment is the way that I see it. And I'm always looking for the next thing to absorb and the next way to give my energy to be of most influence. So kind of generically, I think this experience is exciting if we let ourselves be a vessel for the divine intelligence to come through us.
And consciousness loves to expand. And the way that it does that in this physical reality I've experienced is through questions and through asking questions into the universe. And it's always available to us. The answers will come when we open that field of questioning. And as you said, intellectual curiosity. What are you asking yourself right now the most about the nature of this universe, why we're here, what it means to be a human? What are those big questions that are on your mind right now?
You know what, it's interesting. My entire life, I feel like I've been driven and guided by one essential question, which is always just why. It's like the spiraling mechanism through the question why that brings you deeper into the source of why the question arose. And also it gets answered by going into the singularity of that particular question. So every time I feel something, I'm always compelled to ask, why is this feeling present? And that immediately leads to the nexus point of where integration is found. And so I'm always asking, why these tendencies externally and internally simultaneously? When I work with somebody, it's all about why is this experience coming up? Why is there fragmentation in the field? Why is somebody feeling split, or why are they symptomatically experiencing whatever it is that they are? And why always leads you to understand the many layers of the simulation, because from the why, the how, the what, the where, everything else is found. And it's compiled based on that deep yearning to understand really the reason or the meaning behind what is. And so I find myself constantly asking, why is something arising? Why am I feeling a certain way? Why is something coming up externally? Because it's always almost perfectly mirroring some internal aspect of the experience. And so that's led me into bigger and bigger questions consistently about the nature of the universal hologram and what's happening in the collective consciousness. And I've also realized how much of my individual experience is mirrored in other people's experiences. And that's been a real mind bender and an eye opener to investigate, because the more that I lean into the nature of the subjective experience, the more it seems to connect to the fractal, which is everybody else's experience. And specifically moving into proportional aspects of the collective consciousness, like the divine feminine. Every single bearer of feminine energy, which is literally every single one of us, is experiencing a connection to that cosmic feminine source. and the collective consciousness of everybody going through the motions of the feminine. Just like all of us are moved by the planets and the astronomical alignments and the celestial bodies, all of that energy is leading to the convergent point of what we're feeling as our personality goes through certain shifts, as the ego is forced to integrate, as we're meant to look into our shadow. So every time something's arising, I'm automatically asking myself, okay, how much of this is happening to me versus the entire collective mind? And what is this happening for? What are we being forced to awaken to and to see to the bottom of, to understand the truth of who we really are? So I'm seeing more and more, I feel through the eyes of oneness, and writing my book really brought me there. Over the last year, I've really gone through a very deep experience of birthing consciousness through me, which took me to really a new level of understanding myself, wisdom, really universal intelligence, because that leads to this almost impersonal experience of just being another vessel of consciousness. And then that also begs the question, isn't every single person also a vessel of awareness? And how do we all awaken our individual ability to be that, to see that we are fractals of source? And if we accept and honor that, we transmute the lower egoic function into just a vessel for higher intelligence, for love, for soulfulness to expand through us, and to be of service to the divine through every different facet and aspect of our lives. So a lot of different questions, they always connect to all the other questions. But I'd say that more and more I'm asking questions based on soulful inquiry that's coming up very naturally. So it's not like the mind is even introducing the question. It's more of like an active interaction with the questions that are arising in the field, which are automatically answered through everything that you pursue in alignment with that flow. So it's a very graceful dance and relationship with universal consciousness that I find really beautiful, really harmonious, and it's really a blessing to experience it every day.
Yeah, and I remember the first time we were here, we talked about the great split in the world and how it was looking like externally, how we were experiencing these layers of the 5D, the 3D reality. But in the book, you were talking about how people are very split between their conscious and their subconscious minds, and that this projection of our reality is nearly opposite to what we experience within. So now turning it more inward about this split that's going on and how that's reflecting outside first, what can you speak into with regards to that?
So some time ago, I made a video about changes are coming, to really put into the spotlight that the entire collective consciousness is so split that at this point in time, it's just inevitable for there to be greater splits that actually allow for the healing to ensue. It's almost like a person that's been suppressing pain for decades of their life, which begins with an emotional root cause. Let's say it's suppressed anger, or it's some degree of frustration within the self due to a lack of self-love. And that can compound to the point that it's a chronic disease, or it's a pattern that might lead to cancer many years down the line. So essentially, suppressing anything leads to a point where that split creates this schism that needs to be revealed through even deeper pain that arises before the suffering has an opportunity to be reconciled through the work of seeing what really caused that. So I feel like the entire collective consciousness is going through just that. There's so much wounding that planet Earth has gone through, and so much that we're seeing right now is it's not easily reconcilable. It needs for us to all take into account what has been suppressed within our own consciousness and within the entire collective mind. What are people choosing to not see? And so automatically everything is brought into the equation. I feel like from this standpoint of understanding, all the issues are in some way interwoven. It's just like the human body that can't detach the physical from the mental, from the emotional, and the supramental, the higher spiritual aspects of our field of awareness. So the same thing goes for planet Earth. If we're dealing with such wars, such divisiveness, such duality consciousness, pervasive in government level, politically, socially, economically, across every tier of the human experience, that's making us think about what else is being kept from us and what's really causing that duality, which is in part what human beings really like to harbor within themselves. And so the microcosmic reflection of that is that almost everybody is harboring a deep split between mind and heart, conscious and subconscious minds. And it's a very important thing to begin to analyze. Where are you split within yourself? Meaning, where are you holding these deep fragments in terms of different parts of you that you don't want to acknowledge, different pain points that you choose to distract yourself from and maybe escape into a reality of running away from your true self and the parts that really need to be identified and integrated. And instead of doing that, you choose to don a mask or enter this personified version of yourself that's trying to feel good instead of really understand who you are. And the entire planet Earth right now, the collective consciousness is bearing a very narcissistic mask. And the way it energetically feels to me is that narcissistic collapse is overdue. Just like the nature of an individual that bears a very split psyche, and that eventually realizes that the nature of that egoic mask, it can't be sustained for too long. Because although that conceited ego, it can lead to superficial gains, to success, materialism, you can find ways to achieve a lot of comfort in the 3D world and in the matrix. But at a certain point, you realize a lot is missing from that. You can't experience true love, true connection, true authenticity. You're always seeking for more validation, more approval. And you're constantly escaping from those inner pain points because what's impossible for a narcissist or a very egoically fragmented person to experience is contentment with their true self. So it all comes down to, at the end of the day, when you're with yourself, when you have to face your aloneness, or when we're confronted with really big splits in the collective, like what COVID did to all of us, when you're forced to be in your house alone, or when there's nowhere to go, or where, social norms are all of a sudden broken, what do you do then? And I feel these are the small tests that are really revealing when something bigger goes down, how are people going to respond to it? Are we going to be freaking out because there's no way for us to escape that brokenness that we've been experiencing internally? Or are we going to realize that this is really a time for those splits to be reconciled and to understand that all that is happening now is really an attempt for consciousness to come back into a state of unity? And that's really revealing the deeper split, because the way that people respond to that breaking down of the escape mechanism that's been so pervasive for millennia, really, like trying to hide from the darkness and trying to create this great wall between the conscious and the subconscious mind. At a certain point, that becomes something that can't be maintained any longer. And so that's the point where we really have the opportunity to understand, what have we been doing to create this great divide within ourselves? And oftentimes that feels like an ego death for people when they go through any kind of experience that makes them see they've been lying to themselves or other people, or they've been harboring inauthenticity, these different facades. They can really wake up to the reality that it doesn't need to be so difficult. And this is kind of the irony of this entire split, which seems like it's going to evoke so much suffering. But the reality is, if you're harboring an authentic energy, then nothing's going to change for you when the world splits in deeper ways. Because what's being torn away is the falsity, is the egocentrism, are the masks. If you don't want to keep any blindfolds on, you're just going to be looking clearly into the reality you've already been choosing to see. If you're seeing through the eyes of consciousness, then there's no mirror reflection that's even dirtied or tainted that needs to be shattered, because those are really the illusions that need to go. And so from a collective level, I really feel like we need to think about all the different aspects that have been suppressed from us. This includes lost knowledge, suppressed history, disclosure, really big one, because whatever we're not seeing about the nature of the multidimensional universe, about extraterrestrial life forms, about what the government's been hiding for so many years, which has started to come out, like a lot of people in the spiritual arena are interested in the gateway process and these sorts of very interesting disclosed documents regarding energy, the biofield, the holographic nature of the universe. The more we see these things aren't subjective renderings of what some people think. This is the truth that's been suppressed because collectively people haven't been ready to really see the truth and accept it. And so that's really the pressing question, I think. Are we ready to experience the truth? Because we need to integrate, but a lot of people don't want to. And so that comes back to the nature of the split between conscious and subconscious. That really comes down to how much truth are we afraid of integrating about ourselves, because that's what keeps the conscious mind separate from the subconscious. If we're ready to understand really the reason why we're not healing, or the reason why we're not able to be our true selves, or the reason why we can't hold space for love and unity, which seem to be the desired experiences for everybody, but lo and behold, a lot of people are actually terrified of actually being in a loving frequency, because that requires total integration, total transparency, honesty, integrity. And these are really the most difficult values for human beings to embody, because it's a lot easier for the mind to just conceive of a standard that it wants to embody, and it's all about conformity, fitting in, just embodying the conformist mentality. But that's not really the way that this new earth energy is influencing us. If we're to move with the new energy, it's all about ripping off all the aspects of the self that have been falsified. and starting to honor the deeply authentic essence that's really at the heart of our own beingness. And so that comes down to the heart, the language of the soul, the intuition, the higher self. And that's really what compels me to do the work that I do. I'm constantly receiving more information about what people need to synergize this awareness that we all are one when it comes to the perspective of consciousness. Because a really interesting thought is that our higher self at the highest dimensional level is source. We all share a connection with God. We all are that. But that's like, let's say, an 11th dimensional construct of awareness, which is completely unitive, totally integrative. And to get there, we need to drop everything that doesn't align with consciousness itself. So, how many of us are really able to go there? That's the question. We all can. We all should be aspiring to get there, but we have to be willing to understand all of that inner darkness that doesn't comply with the highest standard of consciousness itself needs to be understood and integrated. And I feel that's why we're really here.
Wow. And I mean, speaking into that inner darkness, I was watching a very recent video of yours where I felt into this pain that you channeled, and I feel like you were moving through, where you talked about the pain caused when men, by not choosing to let go of their ego, bring tremendous pain to the feminine. And this is the pain of preventing union in this physical realm. And when I was feeling into you communicating that, I felt that pain. I felt that pain that the masculine energy has caused onto the feminine. And I would just love to shed more light on that, and open a space where we can talk about this pain that is caused by not letting go of our ego. What are we truly doing to the counterpart, the feminine aspect of this reality?
Yeah. So it's so interesting you bring that up, because I've gotten so much feedback recently about that video. For the people that are wondering what you're referring to, I made a video called The Deepest Twin Flame Video Ever Made, which is quite a bold statement. Yeah.
Good title.
And you know what? I was resisting it for a very long time, similarly to how I wrote my book. For a while, I had this message, and even the title was in my field. But it's a very deep statement to make. A lot of this information is bold, and it takes some level of courage to even put it out there. So in terms of that video, yeah, I was holding back for about a year from even making a follow-up twin flame video because I had some from the previous year. And the reason why is because it's become very controversial, very split, and a lot of people are wrapping egotism and a very toxic view of relationships in general into this paradigm of what the twin flame dynamic is. My way of revealing it has to do more with looking at the cosmic creation story in general. And the main archetypes are the masculine and feminine. These are universal themes. So the two polarities that comprise everything in existence, including, of course, us. So the twin flame dynamic specifically is this extremely deep container for the energies to polarize and to experience either unity or disunity. And the nature of it is literally love or war. There's no in between. Because when those moments of unity consciousness ensue, it's just beautiful. It's an experience of the fifth dimension on Earth. Heavenly, total combination of these different parts which want nothing else than to experience that unification. And so when twin flames actually get together, if people associate with a twin flame relationship, which I believe not everybody has a twin flame, but a lot of people that are going through a cathartic awakening process at some point encounter this person that they recognize is literally a perfect match to them, is a reflection of some parts of their shadow, is definitely drawn at the level of the spiritual, the mental, the emotional experience. And it's a far more profound relationship than even a soulmate, because there's so much deep learning that starts to arise within that relationship, which forces you to understand, can you hold space for love this intense? Can you look into the eyes of even your twin flame and experience this looking into your own soul effect, which cuts through so many layers of the ego, the facades, and the whole nature of the game is that you can't connect to your twin flame unless you can connect so deeply to yourself. And so what tends to happen in these relationships is there's this honeymoon period. First of all, people encounter this person and it's like magic. They're euphoric about it. They're thinking this is everything I've ever wanted. But then slowly and gradually over time, what starts to get revealed is that everything that's been obstructing true love needs to arise. And it's like all these inner splinters or the thorns to the rose that start to arise so that people realize they can't bypass those aspects of them and expect to be with this reflection or counterpart of their own energy field. And so for the masculine consciousness, typically the divine masculine in the lower self embodiment is a bearer of this more Luciferian energy. This is the theme that I've seen play out in every single twin flame dynamic. So I've come to recognize it's really a universal theme in the way the energy is expressed. So the way I elaborate on it in that video is that if the lower self of that Luciferian consciousness is embodied in this divine masculine form, so every masculine counterpart on planet Earth is literally a fractal of Lucifer, then just like I just said, that all of our higher selves on some highest dimensional level, we're all source. We all have to come back to that essential point of unity. Then on the lower self level, we have a different archetype that we all come to see is really part of how our lower self is expressed. For the masculines on Earth, Lucifer is this energy of wanting to dominate the physical plane. It's typically what motivates men to achieve and to create materialistic success for them. Luciferian energy is super focused on being seen in a high and worthy manner, very focused on success, on being seen as important. And so that really is the nature of egotism. For a lot of men, they get enmeshed in that Luciferian mindset, which typically also, a big part of that is they were programmed to see themselves as needing to achieve certain things in order to experience love, typically due to some degree of programming, conditionality, sometimes a mother wound, which leads to this feeling of the feminine is only going to want me if I prove myself to be superior through the societal notion of what the masculine is supposed to conform to. And it's a standard that's really conditional in nature, which conditionality is, of course, the antithesis of true love. So as soon as you have a standard that to be lovable, you need to show your ego in a certain way. You've got to prove yourself worthy through how much money you have or what kind of a job you have. That in and of itself creates a distortion. So that man is going to pursue, for example, a woman, or I should say, backtrack. I always turn to the masculine as kind of a man because I like to, connect it for ease of sake to the pronoun he, but it's important to note that the masculine consciousness can be in the embodiment of a man or a woman. It doesn't really matter. There's plenty of women walking around the planet that are super materialistic, that have the same notion of conditional love, and that find it impossible to relax into their own heart space and to embody their own divine feminine center. So in that case, in a twin flame dynamic, those women would be also pertinent to this divine masculine consciousness and the Luciferian energy that needs to be transmuted. So for that individual in the relationship, they're going to be feeling like even when they encounter a love so deep and they physically want to merge with that counterpart, they're going to feel like they're not deserving of it. And when the feminine consciousness experiences that, which the feminine typically is there to experience a deep spiritual union, when she encounters the masculine, she actually sees straight to their soul. She wants to experience deep connection on all levels of the chakra system. She wants to go above and beyond and transcend, because the true nature of the feminine is it's ephemeral, it's ethereal. It wants to be existing outside of time and space. And so that's why I often speak to the feminine principle as really the key to ascension and to transcending this matrix. It's an experience which is all about embodying flow and grace and divinity. It's about letting go of physical fixation, attachments, even to the point of not being attached to physical sex and intimacy, because there's a deep transmutation of that sexual energy through lust or through attachment to the partner to experience wholeness, so that that energy flows upward through the heart, and through that there's this entry point to higher consciousness. So the feminine, naturally, she holds these keys, the woman or the feminine that's been awakened enough to her role as an antenna of source consciousness. And so when she encounters the masculine, she wants to bring him the gift of the feminine, which is to essentially be key into that lock, to show that there is an outlet to higher consciousness, which is really just embracing unity consistently. So for her, the relationship isn't something that's attached, codependent. There's no need for conditional expectations, and she's not even there for anything she can get out of the relationship. It's more about embodying a certain frequency or feeling. So then the pain that the feminine experiences is when she realizes that the masculine has no idea what she's really looking for. The masculine is at that lower frequency range of still not integrating his lower chakra system, or still being motivated by his egoic needs, those survival mechanisms, that need for lust, for greed, for fame, for attention, for any of those things that can fuel the masculine ego. That's binding him to the matrix conditionality, and that's still keeping him stuck to even the wounded inner child, which every masculine that hasn't gone through that deeper feminine awakening is still actually experiencing. It's a feeling of being trapped because he thinks that he needs to prove this sense of self, which is really this grand illusion. And that's the nature of that Luciferian energy. It tries to keep itself stable in a very stubborn way, which is exactly the personality of the ego. And so, the really interesting point, which woke a lot of people up in that video that I made, is that Lucifer too wants to ascend. Like any one of the archetypes, at the highest point, Lucifer's higher self is also a source like connection to all that is. So Lucifer will inevitably also ascend into God. Lucifer will drop the mask, will drop the ego. What does it take for Lucifer to ascend? It's the same thing that's required for every masculine counterpart on planet Earth to realize that those egoic strategies, that wall that they've concocted between their subconscious and conscious mind to prove this false sense of self, all of it's futile. And actually, that's what leads to the pain that the divine feminine experiences, which is mirrored within the masculine as well. Because if he's pushing away the feminine counterpart in the physical through just the subconscious action of thinking that he's not deserving of that deep love, then he's actually repulsed by the energy of love. He's feeling like if he integrates love, he's going to die. He's going to lose himself. And that would be the nature of narcissistic collapse. Back to what's kind of happening on planet Earth. When this energy of deep love enters any scene, any field, any relationship, it's a very disruptive frequency. And that's, I feel, a real blind spot in even the spiritual community, because a lot of people talk about it in a very kind of love and light manner, like this is just an easy experience. But the reality is that love is scary for so many people. That's why so many people on Earth have this avoidant attachment style in relationships, because that's the energy of being threatened by the experience of love, by that frequency. And there's so many reasons why people wouldn't trust the energy of love. It comes down to whether you experienced, let's say, a kind of a volatile relationship with love when you were growing up. Maybe one parent withheld love from you. And so you feel like you need to earn love, or you need to be on pins and needles when it comes to experiencing your authentic self. So for any reason, any individual feels like they can't show up fully and just be their true self consistently, then a part of that is they're withholding love from themselves. And so in that scenario, you're not experiencing self-love. You're not seeing that you can be a consistent version of self all the time, which is what the masculine is really troubled by. The masculine collectively is not in a position where they realize that they can just be their feminine and masculine at the same time. So that divine union is something that is the ideal, but the feminine tends to see it a lot more clearly than the masculine does, to the point that the masculine can even adopt kind of a mask that they are in divine union, or that they are enlightened, they've figured it out, because that's also the energy of Lucifer. Lucifer shows up like an enlightened one that has all the information, which is all very mental, cerebral, and it's like the enlightened mind that takes over and tries to run the show. But unless Lucifer can integrate that feminine aspect of the feeling state and understand that egoic dominant strategy, it actually limits the conscious experience, and there's so much that's left out of that, which brings all that pain to the feminine and to his own heart. So that's like a general abstract overview of the energy as it's being experienced. But yeah, typically the feminine experiences this deep pain because to be in such a loving energy all the time is a very courageous move to make. So many women are, and bearers of the feminine, it just tends to be mostly women on the planet at this time, are feeling kind of left out, kind of excluded, kind of like they're not really sure what to do with this gift of the feminine because it's not really being integrated on planet Earth the way that it should be. And historically, that's the way that it has been. I mean, a lot of feminine wisdom has been suppressed. Women have gone from being kind of worshipped and venerated in certain cultures and traditions to being ostracized and subjugated. And that's still kind of the nature of the patriarchy. So it's very split because in this world, obviously women have so much more power these days, but internally, a lot of women are not waking up to their power, and the divine feminine is still suppressed collectively. So if we kind of read the energy as it stands on a global level at this time, the divine feminine needs to rise. And that comes in the form of the energy of that creation force, that love, that surrendered wisdom that comes through when you really trust your soul and you are courageous enough to lead with your spirit body. That will lead to a lot of transformation that needs to come through. And a lot of that also has to do with women saying no to things, and the feminine saying no to things that are not really in alignment with the feeling state. So kind of the general blanket statement I would make is that when something feels like it's out of alignment, when As the feminine, for example, you're in a relationship that doesn't feel like it's allowing you to honor yourself at the deepest level of self-respect, and you can't uphold the dignity of your values and your morals and experience your heart in alignment, then that relationship is not allowing for the integration of the feminine spark and that deep soulful essence. And so I'm constantly meeting with men and women alike that are feeling like their feminine is this elusive part of them that they don't know how to integrate, because I feel that's what humanity is really troubled by. Like this entire matrix structure and society has really created a deficit for feminine energy to flow freely. And so many people feel like they need to conform to the matrix, the expectations, whether that's through the corporate world or through how you're supposed to present yourself and live in a certain way, even through social media, which is often something that is through a conformist template. And you need to do things in a certain way, whether that's even conforming to an algorithm or to a certain way that you think will allow you to achieve physical success. But all of that suppresses the feminine, because the whole nature of the feminine is to be outside of the box, outside of the scope of what has to happen through somebody else's lens. It's all about giving yourself to the stream of awareness, to source consciousness, and to your own higher self, and letting that run your reality. So it's all based on feelings. And so that can't be validated by anyone or anything other than you. And so I'd say, like, for people that are thinking about how do I connect to my own divine feminine, it begins with how safe do you feel connecting to your own heart space, to your own still point, the 0 point of your own field, where there's no distractions, there's no escapism, there's no opportunity to be anywhere else, and you're in that sheer oneness. Are you comfortable with that experience? And what starts to arise that you know needs to be integrated in your life, but maybe it isn't? Because if you haven't created an outlet for that feminine aspect of self to be introduced in all parts of your life, you're maintaining that polarized reality. And that's in part the egoic illusion, which is you always need to be apprehensive of how truthful, how vulnerable, how real you really are, which I feel needs to be done away with if we want to live with real integrity and depth consistently. So that's a lot that I just said regarding what brings pain to the feminine, but it's really that there's so much distortion in the world, and the feminine sees and feels all of it. And it's a lot to suppress, which the feminine can't really do at all.
What do you feel it would take for humanity, masculine and feminine alike, to choose love above anything else?
Yeah, such a powerful, brilliant question. Well, choosing love, it comes down to the question of, can you choose to be, first of all, that true self that is loving in nature, consistently and in all parts of your life? If there's that energy of the ego or that Luciferian tactic still in effect, then there's a fear of letting go of that controlling mechanism, which is the false self, that anti-you, essentially, that's still trying to dominate your reality, and it's creating a false prison or a prism of who you really are not. So the thing that people really need to think about is, where are they still playing a game with and against themselves to create this strategy of trying to achieve something through actually going outside of themselves and achieving an inauthentic experience, to try to get something that their mind thinks that they need, but in reality isn't a heartfelt experience. The ultimate strategy is, first of all, not having a strategy altogether. That's the most unconditional way to do it. But if a strategy is needed per se, then it's about allowing for collaboration between the heart, mind, and spirit consistently. And so if anything goes outside of those boundaries, that's something that is kind of a one-dimensional experience. That's doing something which is severing you from the divine flow, which is you essentially moving away from what your higher self wants you to be doing. So I often bring it to the point of collaborating or becoming your own higher self. Because if you're in alignment with your higher self, you are absolutely in the frequency of love consistently. And so to adopt and to choose love, it's all about choosing to be in alignment with this higher aspect of you. So we talked about, I remember, quite a bit the first time that we did this. And the main point was that the higher self is the integrated future self. It's the part of you that already exists down that timeline of you choosing love. Because if you're choosing love, you're choosing to create this sense of oneness. You're choosing to remove these illusions, this escapism mentality, and to remove everything that wouldn't serve in that unifying effort, which is what consciousness is really propelling us to embody within us. So if we're choosing love, we're choosing to make the most courageous moves in alignment with what the higher self is propelling us to do. And typically people know or have some deep intuitive insight regarding what their higher self wants them to do. And the way that could feel is like you're being pushed to step into your power. Typically, there's a very empowering energy that is really part of this experience. And it's an energy of, if you're choosing love, you're choosing to be in an impersonal experience of serving something higher and greater than you, which a lot of people are really afraid of. And again, that's choosing to battle between the ego that thinks it wants to do things in a certain way and has certain ulterior motives and goals that are still materialistically established to prove its sense of self. But the higher self is not about proving anything, it's just about serving a divine cause. And that's the highest possible purpose for the individual. So we can download that purpose literally by moving into a state of not trying to concoct anything new from the mind's perspective, not trying to figure out how do we make the most use for our physical self, but more thinking about if we free up our energetic system and allow for us to become these conduits of higher dimensional information, then we start being literally pushed to go in certain directions. And typically, what needs to be freed up is the energetic blockages that are living inside of our vessel at all times. That could be a solar plexus blockage when it comes to really showing up in our full autonomy, our power, being seen in a certain way, which many people that actually are bearers of feminine wisdom have this issue. I've noticed a really deep correlation between, and we talked about also in the first go around, that the solar plexus is that center of deep empowerment. And in order to embody that, we need to be okay with trusting that the awareness is not really ours. We're just vessels of it. And that seems to be the kind of the undertone of this whole conversation, because that's what I've been stepping into much more myself. When I wrote this book, I experienced this profound experience of literally feeling like all I need to do is not battle the fact that this information wants to come through me. And it's really a birthing process. So what needed to physically be removed from my field is any resistance, any interference. I realized there were certain limiting patterns coming up, like I'm too young to write this book, or maybe nobody wants to hear this from me at this time. Maybe it's too early. Maybe I need some more physical years to mature to the point where I can publish this. So I realized very quickly that these were all egoic limitations. And actually, I was not doing the energy justice because it was pushing me to just let go and to make this happen. What I realized through this writing process is that this information isn't really mine. And the way I realized that is that this entire book was written speech to text. And I've had some experience with this method. It's really, really cool and fascinating because
In the closet, on the floor, you pull
got
out
it.
your voice memos app,
That's
and
right.
we're just transcribing this book.
Exactly. I've done that with my Instagram postings over years where I would just sit down, like there's a certain little glimpse of information. Okay, let's talk about intuition. As you know, you brought up the first time, I did that with the newspaper articles when there would just be this download of different insight, and I need to articulate that. In the beginning, it came through writing, but once I realized that it's much easier to just communicate through the voice and to eliminate any obstruction, it became a next level of interesting to just try to see how much deeper can it go if I allow myself to literally lose any part of myself and just become the information. And so that's the true channeling process. A lot of people ask me, what are you channeling? Is it like a guide, an angel, a master? And it's always felt for me like it's just my higher self. But that's where I've realized that I'm becoming more elevated by trusting my higher self with time. And so the way that I physically ascend in awareness is I allow myself to surrender to the higher self and receive this information. And so during the period of time that I was writing this book, that was the most intense time that I've ever experienced as far as these energetic downloads go. I mean, physically, it was overwhelming me to the point where I would have these hot flashes throughout the day. My heart field got so expansive that sometimes it felt like there was just like a ball of fire around my chest. I would get at times headaches because the information was coming through my crown chakra with such intensity that I had to physically say sometimes, all right, let's slow it down. Let's take a break because it's a little too much for my physical avatar to handle. You know, it really felt like that. It sounds hilarious, but it was a very supernatural experience. And what's really fascinating too is that there were a lot of concepts and even vocabulary words that came up in the book that I don't usually use. And I had to look them up when I was transcribing it because I actually doubted some of it. I said, well, I haven't really used that. Am I like applying this properly? Does this make sense? And I later realized that higher self, it really knows more than the physical mind does. So it needs to be surrendered to completely. And so that's really the process of allowing yourself to become the higher self. You start to receive so much more than your mind is even capable of understanding. And through that, your own neural network expands to accommodate this higher dimensional information. So yeah, that's all back to our point about the power of surrender and becoming as one with this process of the higher self, which is extremely loving, because that entire process was literally like a reverse cascade of information to teach other people the power of connecting to their own higher self, because that's where all the mastery is found. And if we're courageous enough to go there, that energy is going to require us to serve in new and inventive ways. And it's actually less about us than it is about just allowing for this information to come through in whatever way that it wants to. So that's a really key question to drive in, which is, what is the energy inside and from outside of you or your higher self want to communicate through you? And are you allowing that to happen, or are you creating that resistance, which really makes your life more difficult? So what I found is that the less you resist it, the easier and the more fun it really gets, and the more that you can serve people and yourself simultaneously. So that I
Mm,
feel is the more soulful strategy to incorporate to live in
yeah.
alignment.
And you brought up in the book, specifically on the chapter about resistance, that you came to the realization that a lot of the resistance that we feel is this subconscious program from our ancestors and the generational programming that came before us from the people and the generations that came prior to us. How are we starting to move through the generational programming in order to create something new in our life, in order to, get out of that program that we've been running for who knows how many centuries in our generational line?
hmm So, the main undertone of the generational programs is this attachment to the matrix and to the traditional coping mechanism, which is survival through suffering and through the forced attempt to be this egoic personality, through the conditionality of needing to defend that personality to enforce your survival. So, it's this kind of a feedback loop of looking at the surroundings to define what role you're supposed to play to guarantee your risk of succeeding in life. It's very deterministic, it's very rooted in cause and effect and thinking about the future in order to figure out what you're supposed to do to cater to that condition. And it's very much also about thinking about what others want from you. So that real deep trauma always comes from what other people told you to create as far as an identity goes for yourself. And thinking about what happens if I'm not really loyal to that lineage and to that generational program that came before me. So, what's been coming up for so many people collectively is that they're still subservient to these generational programs, which are completely outdated. These programs are no longer in effect unless you choose to maintain those ways of the egoic strategy, which is still epigenetically coming up for so many different people. And what I feel is happening also interestingly is that a lot of people right now, they're literally meant to break these programs to the point where they have always felt like outcasts or they felt like they're individuals. Maybe they don't fit in with other family members. I work with a lot of people that have like a brother and a sister that are conformists that play in to that program, that are succeeding and maybe kind of conforming based on Luciferian mentality of being okay with the matrix ways and doing what their parents and predecessors have been telling them to do. And they enjoy that. But then it comes down to that one unique individual that has no idea why this is happening and how in the world they can even conform because conformity was never an option for them. And so that unique individual is kind of the unicorn in the lineage that is born with a very special intention to do things differently. And so they're typically a rebel. They're this unique soul with unique abilities and traits, and typically a very deep feminine heart and an awareness of wisdom that has not been understood. And so they either are brought into hiding mode, reservation, deep trauma and pain of suppressing their true selves and thinking that they actually have a problem because they're not conforming. Or they can switch that 180 degrees and realize they have a gift, which is that they're already born to see and think outside the box. And so they're not able to conform, which means they're here to make this world a more unique place. And sometimes these souls are referred to as kind of star seeds or indigos. There's different ways of kind of identifying these unique individuals. But the point is, they are connected to that higher frequency source of information, which their soul has already brought them to experience. And so they're literally purifying the lineage. They're purifying the ancestral pool by bringing down that wisdom that they're more closely connected to. And so what they need to experience is really a quantum jump from repression, from this hermit mode of isolation, fear of rejection, fear of being the different one or the black sheep in the family, to instantaneously embracing that they have a lot to do and it's actually overdue. And they are the gift that their family and their entire lineage needs to achieve that effective transmutation, to bring to the future generations the power of consciousness and everything that they've been able to heal within themselves. So typically, these souls are stuck in fear and they're not really sure, is it time for them to embody this deeply rooted wisdom? Or is there going to be an implication? Is their family going to turn against them? Are they going to be disobedient? And so they're stuck in between that ego soul complex, thinking that they're actually going to turn against their lineage if they break free and if they embody this more empowered way of seeing reality. But that's the illusion. So for them to lean into their heart and to realize that they were actually born to serve a higher cause is the most powerful thing that they can do. And it's what their entire family would want them to do. So from that higher self perspective, their parents' higher self is actually programming for them the trauma that they need to uncover their power. So this is like
fall up.
Exactly. To fall up instead of fall down, which is why I created that really deep analogy, because so many people are falling down. They're feeling like if they're recipients of the trauma, then they need to just ride with that experience, suppress themselves, close up like a clamshell, harbor all this deep pain and resentment and anger, really just shutting down the pearl and the gift within their own spirit. The alternative to that is realizing the more pain and suffering you've actually harbored and gathered in your lifetime, the more that means that your deepest purpose is to activate your free will. And that's the deepest possible way of understanding trauma, in my opinion. It's seeing that the more pain that you have, the more opportunity you have to create the most healing effect. And that's typically seen as the wounded healer archetype. But it doesn't even need to be seen as a wounded person. I see that that pain instantaneously can transform into a superpower if you realize that it's not even meant to be perceived as pain. It's meant to be the catalyst for you to understand how deeply important your purpose really is, which is something that those predecessors weren't able to fully understand or gather, but that you now are able to. And it's creating this continuum between kind of the beginning and the end. The ancestral wisdom, which typically we see as the wisdom of the ancients or our ancestors that had a great deal of information about how to use your body, your mind, your spirit as a consciousness technology to free your soul, to not be enslaved by the matrix, but to always be transcendent in nature, to communicate deeply with nature, to see through the eyes of oneness. But then that was lost along the way. And so instead of blaming anybody in your lineage, your family, society, or anything else outside of you for creating that shadow, it's now time to see that if you feel like you are the one to break that kind of generational curse, all you need to do is do things differently. That's it. And that's where free will comes into the equation. So that's another thing that's always up for debate. I often deal with this question of like, well, do we have free will or not? Because neurologically speaking, we don't even have the decision in between when, that impulse comes in neuronally speaking and when the decision or the action is actually made. But there's space in between. And I really want people to kind of put the magnifying glass to that space in between, which is the golden ground for making change happen. Even if you feel that you are programmed to experience trauma, pain, suffering, the same habits and repetitious beliefs that were infiltrating your field from maybe an early age, there's a part of you that knows you have a choice when it comes to embodying that. And that's a thing that's triggering for a lot of people to realize, because even if they know that there is some degree of a choice or if they can do things differently, part of them doesn't want to release that anger and that spirit of reservation and kind of wanting to be frustrated at someone else instead of seeing that they can reclaim their autonomy and do things differently, because it's much easier to blame and to outsource awareness or the reason why life is the way that it is to somebody else than to see that you are the creator of your experience. But that's what we really need to do. So really embodying feminine wisdom and flow, it's a lot deeper than just feeling, because feeling can go in any direction, right? We can feel deep pain and be engulfed in that pain and be consumed in our own darkness, or feel our potential for our entire life. But what the planet really needs right now more than ever is people realizing we have felt so much for so long, but that feeling needs to be transformed into action, into change, into disruptive behaviors, to not deal with any toxic relationships, dynamics, or anything you're cultivating in your reality that feels misaligned. And so that puts every single facet of the human experience into question. And whatever doesn't feel like it's congruent with this inner resolution you're creating within yourself, which is, I'm choosing to serve love for myself and others simultaneously. I'm doing what my ancestors would want me to do. I'm doing what my higher self is calling me to do. I'm doing what the planet Earth needs all of us to do most, which is emerging out of this kind of stuck I consciousness of it's all about me and everybody's against me and I'm scared of what I'm supposed to do here, to realizing we're all unique revolutionaries in the human experience and we need to figure out why it is specifically that our soul brought us into this time and place to deal with this deep duality and to also realize that it's reached its expiration date. And there's a different form of the conscious experience which can be embodied, which is really about this and consciousness, integrating, coming into alignment with all the seemingly opposite parts of the experience and seeing them as really complementary, which again comes back to masculine and feminine and the twin flame dynamic. These are all parts that all of us have. We have the masculine, we have the feminine. We have the ego, which can adopt a very devilish kind of energy to it, be restrictive, confine us to these paranoid thoughts, these fears, these irrational beliefs about reality, which can be completely obliterated as soon as we see through a different lens of awareness. And so we need to learn to play with this experience in our own minds and hearts by just testing different beliefs and different opinions about how reality really feels when we choose to step into a higher archetype of self. And so that is a totally transformative experience. And I feel it's got to be clarified, especially in the spiritual community, because so many people think it's enough to just implement, let's say, a practice or do something to embody a spiritual version of yourself. But that can very easily be a dissociated part of you, just a different version of yourself that you're sometimes in that position of embodying. Like if you're in the meditative room and you're just focusing on the meditation state, but you're forgetting all that you egoically are for the other half of the day when you're living your life and you're drowning in those sensations that you're just used to, habitually speaking. So the true art of practicing integration is seeing through this lens of awareness all the time and challenging yourself to not give that up, to live in the meditative state, to think about, is this reality consistently what I want to experience in my inner world? Or is it reflecting differently, which is really the proof that the subconscious is disconnected from the conscious mind, which means something isn't being interwoven, or there's some parts of you that you don't want to let go of, or there's some things that you don't want to really experience outside of you because you're still afraid that maybe people aren't going to like who you are deep down when you start to reveal these deeper, truer aspects of you. So that's really the theme that I feel is people need to red pill themselves into receiving their own courage and understanding that whatever they're choosing to not symbiotically create into all parts of their living experience is something that's going to be projected as a future challenge, a future issue, more suffering that comes in their direction because they're not really choosing to free themselves from their own suffering. And that's triggering, which is why it's a red pill. But at the same time, it's extremely liberating because if we give ourselves that ingredient that we need, we can come to the deepest possible alignment because we realize it's really up to us.
Yeah. And it's almost a symbolic act that you chose to wear red today, because I feel like you're red pilling all of us with these beautiful streams of consciousness. When I tune into this wisdom that you said that has been lost for many years, that our ancients knew, we were briefly talking about the alchemical union that one can reach once they learn to integrate that masculine, that feminine. In today's modern society, there could be many different tools, I guess, resources out there to create that internal harmony and balance. The ancients, the Egyptians, they did this very well in their temples. They would know, especially when the priests and the priestesses would go with these rituals, creating that alchemical union. I don't remember exactly what it was like in those times, but I can feel into it was a very potent way of reaching that balance again. So I'm really curious to know if you've had any downloads or insights as to how these ancients were able to create the union and the oneness within themselves, and how those principles can be applied to today's modern world where we don't have necessarily, these mystery schools or temples that we can go to all the time to create that within ourselves.
Okay, so the main concept that is coming up, which I also talk about in the book, is the Philosopher's Stone, which I feel has always been this very interesting, enigmatic metaphor and deep symbolism surrounding this alchemical union. And it's like being seen in different traditions by different individuals as either a physical thing that we need to look for, as this missing ingredient of integration, which the alchemists would physically try to derive, or it's something much more energetic in nature. And it's about really looking through the lens of consciousness and trying to understand that magic that's created when we really combine masculine and feminine to the point that we create the hero's gamos, this kind of ambiguous combined conglomerate of energy and information. So it's the masculine and feminine merging into that cosmic egg, becoming the monad again, which has this energetic signature of unity consciousness. It's something that can't be distinguished. So it's literally like the masculine and feminine become this non dual pairing. So they're no longer polar opposites. There's no competition left. So let's talk about it just from that energetic standpoint. As far as what's been conveyed in all these traditions and what can be created as kind of an inner experience. So I really want people to feel into what that energy feels like within them. Because if you're in a moment of that deep stillness where you can't even discern between masculine or feminine, where you literally become both at the same time, it's typically an experience of deep collaboration. So they're two coming together into this oneness where there's no ability to even discern or distinguish. There's no separateness to be found. It's like if we think about the higher dimensional reality where nothing is separate and everything is seen in terms of a continuum of oneness and universality. So that's the nature of the masculine and feminine coming together through this philosopher's stone. That's the area of the divine merger. So we have to think about it in terms of the singularity point where that's how the monad is really expressed. So when I say the monad, I mean that's the highest nature of the soul signature, which is conveying how oneness can be achieved by unifying all the different aspects of the self, which all the chakras have different ways of orienting the masculine and feminine energies. And we need to be really aligning with the heart and the mind in order to create this cohesive force within us, which feels like coherence. So the way that the energy really feels is if you can maintain the balance of thinking and feeling, if you can combine the left and right brain hemispheres, if you can combine intuitive reasoning with the logical intellect, which might feel very primordial to you, something that you're able to think about without even consciously thinking it through. So that's that deep knowing that you can experience, mentally speaking. And also combine the inner world with the outer experience. So most people, they feel some kind of discrepancy within these different aspects, or they go into one experience at some points in time and into the other when they're maybe comfortable or feel safe to do that. And so what needs to be kind of refined for a lot of people is that that unitive experience should be the standard for living. But most aren't even sure where to begin. Like, how do you come into such alignment with yourself that you don't need to discern between when it's safe to play the game in this masculine way versus the more feminine way? And so that's why I feel surrender is really the missing key and the ingredient. And that's what's been conveyed in all these different traditions for throughout entire history. Like surrender is this art of allowing for integration consistently so that you're not maintaining any self-dualism, the way that I talk about in the book. And I feel a lot of people, they're not ready to really go there because to surrender is to literally let go of everything that you're not able to control. It's to allow yourself to be free of the need to manipulate and to move from either or faculty of your awareness, but to use both simultaneously. So it's actually something that can be learned, but for some people, it's much more innate. For people that are not used to controlling their identity in different ways or to maintain kind of split versions of themselves, it's a lot more natural to be living in this interwoven manner. But I feel that's the main thing that needs to be brought into the inner focus state is can you allow yourself to hold space for that vulnerable, gentle aspect of yourself, which is really the energy of the inner child. It's like the part of you that's always been around from day one that needs to be nurtured, that has to be caretaken in a way that you approach yourself almost like the Divine Mother would, which is why that Divine Mother energy is so incredibly healing. Because if you're in that state, you are literally tapping into the creation force, the beginning and the end. You're able to understand that wherever you've come, even if that's far away from that 0 point, it can immediately come back to oneness if you allow yourself to simply hold space for that experience of forming the feeling of that oneness. So the feeling needs to be emphasized. And for a lot of people, they don't even have the kind of environment in their life in order to experience that kind of oneness. friendships, relationships, family, work, all these things might not be conducive to creating oneness for even the majority of the day. And so, if that's the case, then it doesn't really matter what kind of pockets of oneness you experience in a meditation or in other aspects of your reality. It's really about creating as much of that inner unity as possible. And that's the merge of the masculine and feminine, to where you can just be literally without needing to discern between parts of you or how you show up personality wise or energetically speaking. So, that oneness I feel like is a very powerful goal to set for anybody that's thinking about what's the next tier of their evolution. It's really, can you support that condition of oneness, which is the most powerful gift that you can really give yourself, because that will compel you to show up in that way for other people, for the world, and most likely give you the authority to defend your own mission and whatever calling that you feel is in highest alignment with you.
Now, Gabi, what do you feel are going to be the people, places, and things that will begin to attract once this alchemical union and this state of unity consciousness and oneness is activated within us into the external world? What do you feel then will begin to attract differently from coming from this self-dualism that we've been coming from in the old world?
Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of people that are realizing, if they're really relating deeply to this information and they feel there is a deeper purpose that they've been suppressing, there's a next chapter of their own evolutionary journey, which corresponds with the collective evolution. I feel there's a whole new paradigm, which is this ecosystem, part of a more conscious solution or alternative to the ways of the old world or the old paradigm. So, literally, any aspect of the human experience we can think of, like sciences, medicine, psychology, business, finances, politics, everything has an alternative, which can be kind of seen as the new earth complement to the old earth way of thinking and being. And the people that are understanding the need for change, they're going to feel like they can contribute something unique to this emergent ecosystem of unity consciousness, which needs to be introduced through powerful souls that are willing to provide their own gifts, their own solution, their own abilities, which is about establishing something completely new, completely different. So there's like a kind of a version 2.0 of everything that I feel is emerging. And slowly but surely, people are realizing that all these things need to be interconnected. That's what really sets it apart. So if we're moving out of this very disunified matrix where everything is kind of separate, there's a lot of contradictions between systems and foundations, ruling structures of the world. Then if we're moving out of duality individually, then that means we need to move into more unitive experience collectively, where really the science of consciousness and everything we're talking about here, it's all about educating people about how oneness can be created as a condition in every part of their lives. That begins with thinking about the whole human. And whole human development is about creating this kind of internal matrix where you're unified in terms of your thoughts, your feelings, your energy, your intentions, what you're doing, and how you're showing up internally for yourself. So you know automatically that from that really deep unit of focus, that if there's like a pain point that arises or if you get sick, instead of thinking about how do you medicate that, you automatically would be thinking, what arose that created this point of dissonance, so that I can actually hug that piece of fragmentation back into a condition of inner wholeness. And that becomes like a natural way of going about reality, which is really beautiful, because instead of letting those shadow parts pile up and then letting them kind of bring into the picture even deeper splits in the future, you can immediately start to arouse that condition of unity from any sign that you have come out of unity. So the same thing goes for any of these different industries and different spaces, which need to be also brought into a more conscious perspective. Science, there's a lot of alternative sciences. We talked about a little bit last time too, from different epigenetic research and new holistic ways of going about reality. We need to start to visualize the energy field, understand the workings of the biofield in more clear and concise ways. So this needs to be something that is no longer subjective, and people can really see that immediately there is an effect on the energetic level when you change a thought form or when you eat something, you introduce any variable in your physical field, you start to experience an energetic biofeedback response. And so when people realize that and they're educated to understand the multidimensional nature of their own field of awareness, they're going to be living much more consciously. And that means thoughtfully pursuing every different thing in your life. How you eat, how you relate, what kinds of things you do. Just every moment in life can be an intentional one. And so that has to be educated. So the ultimate thing that I do think I mentioned it the first time too is kids need to be taught this in schools. Like that is my ultimate dream for the world is if children are learning how to self-regulate and learning the power of awareness and surrender and intentionality, then they won't feel a fear of this pressing AI technology and everything that's coming up as potentially dystopian when it comes to people kind of giving their consciousness away to these new systems of thought and intention. And instead seeing that these are all just tools, but nothing can revoke the power of human consciousness and in the organic matrix, which we really need to connect to even more. And so, anyone that does resonate with these deep principles of organic living and being need to offer their own way of bringing this into the world. And so there's so many more artistic, technological, scientific, so many beautiful means of contributing and playing your part in expanding this new earth network, so to speak. So I feel that's what's really going to be emerging. So many new developments, beautiful new things. But perhaps we need to have more of a societal breakdown in order for people to realize the importance of that, which is why so many people are talking about next year being quite a cathartic one. And I think in the near future, we're going to start to see more and more that like change is imminent because we've all gone to this point of realizing it's been too much of that old paradigm. And so people are splitting into either serving simply the old or fearing even introducing anything new or feeling like the new is exactly what we need because a transition is happening. And those souls that are here for it, I feel they're going to be contributing in new and beautiful ways because they know there's nothing to fear. And that's really why we're here.
Mm. And speaking about these new children, why do you feel that the young people of today are so afraid of their, I've heard you call it their aloneness, being lonely, being in that state, of loneliness? Why are they so afraid of that?
Because they haven't been even taught how to be alone in the first place. I think that's a big part of it. Like from the earliest age, most parents are now just giving their kids that phone, that technology. They're just getting glued into the digital matrix. And if that becomes a primary relationship, like neurologically, you see yourself as no different than that digital version of you that you experience through the lens of the screen. And so you're digitizing your existence and you're literally becoming a cyborg. So all these people that are experiencing, especially like our generation, younger folks that are feeling like they can only exist with and through technology, they have no way to even discern their authentic presence without that technology, which I think is incredibly dangerous because you're constantly depending on technology to even receive the kind of dopamine surges that you need to feel okay living and existing. And without that, you feel like you are lacking validation. You're not being seen. You're not being understood. So the really interesting, thought experiment would be like, what if all that was taken away from kids, from young adults, from even adults these days that have already gotten so enmeshed in that digital matrix? As far as kids go, yeah, I feel that aloneness is something that they don't really know what to do with because the real gift of aloneness is what kind of magic can you create in that alone space? Who do you become when you're alone? And the point I bring it to in the book is it's really about discovering your naked essence, which that in and of itself is so beautiful and so terrifying depending on how you associate with your authentic self. If you're afraid of aloneness, then you really don't have an authentic self or you don't know how to access it because you feel that everything else will crumble like a house of cards in your external matrix because everything you've built has been through a deviation from that authentic personality. And so if a child especially isn't taught how to embrace their unique qualities, their authentic essence, then in their aloneness, they're just going to be escaping. And I think a lot of kids are even developing, different learning disabilities and ADHD and all these kinds of things are even psychosomatically arising because they are not sure what to do in their aloneness. A lot of kids are, trying to escape their somatic condition of peace and inner stillness. So they're fidgeting, they're running around, they're hyperactive, they're looking for attention because they haven't received that deep love and nurturing in the space of aloneness, which is why really the parental care and love and why conscious parenting is so essential is because parents are gods for children at a very young age. They're their entire universe. And if a parent shows that divine love and acceptance to a child, they're going to develop a healthy sense of self. They're going to experience themselves like a little microcosm of the entire universe and know how to experience the unitive force of consciousness within themselves, which is how they can healthily individuate and discover their gifts and superpowers. and naturally regulate. But if they're not shown that, they will become a narcissist, and everything else will arise in their life to drown out the sensation of who they really are. So it's quite simple how it forms very early in a child's psyche. But so that's very scary. Even the point you made that a lot of young people can't be alone, that means that a lot of young people are inherently narcissistic in nature. Because if you can't be okay in your aloneness, then you don't have a healthy self that can exist in a position of singularity, which means there's just that really wide schism already between the soul and the ego. And throughout life, that disparity will only widen until potentially, like I said, some kind of narcissistic collapse or inner disaster is going to ensue, so that people realize that they're living some kind of a disrupted illusion that's been created from a young age. But it can be
Mm.
healed. It just takes tremendous courage to do that, as you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And in what other ways will parenting need to evolve as these new children, very tapped in souls, start coming into the planet more and more in these waves?
So the first thing I feel is most important is for a parent to be an observer. So to learn to adopt this non-dual lens of being almost like a source-like figure, just observing the child, observing their ways, because it's so important for parents to realize too that their child is not just an extension of them, because most parents are trying to instill their beliefs, their ideas, their opinions into that child's mind to almost create a mini version of them. But if they're really trying to create a unique being that's going to bring magical things into this world, they need to allow that child to individuate in the way that they are allowing themselves to also experience reality. And the gift that a parent can provide is providing the loving boundary conditions to teach them to self regulate, to learn their emotional space, to understand how to integrate different perspectives. So, the key precepts of conscious living, basically being mindful, being able to introduce original thoughts, always asking the deeper questions, just like you were bringing up, being able to think outside the box, being completely original and not afraid to maintain that authentic essence, because that's the main thing that school crushes. And I personally really remember that experience of, going into school open-mindedly, having that very powerful authentic drive, and then feeling like at a certain moment I could have split from that and I could have easily succumbed to that peer pressure and become like everybody else, or kind of killed this spiritual deep association with my own soul, because that was definitely an opportunity. So that's the thing, that if a parent already knows that that's coming, they need to protect their child and allow them to have an outlet to embrace their authentic self, which many other children probably aren't going to be able to associate with. And so it's creating like a safe haven for the child to explore who they really are, even when the hive mind might not really tolerate it. And so it's being able to preserve that inner aspect. And the other thing is, of course, seeing how the world is evolving, preparing a kid to be present with all these other external factors and the oppositional energy at play. It's teaching them about technology to use it wisely. It's teaching them about AI to preserve their creativity. It's doing kind of the opposite of what the matrix mentality wants us to play into, to be kind of rebellious in this entire experience, because I feel it really calls for that kind of energy if we're to pursue conscious existence. And of course, teaching non duality as that essence of how to integrate, how to choose love, how to maintain compassion, kindness, humility. These are all super important traits, and unfortunately not taught enough at schools. So a child needs to learn how to maintain that part of them that they can't give up, no matter what kind of pressure or expectations are forced on them. And so I feel like the Montessori method of education is a really good example, a little microcosm of how to observe the child living in their own little world and seeing what they're drawn to. Also, Rudolf Steiner's schooling system is all about that. It's another way of looking at it, of just seeing naturally what are their innate abilities, because a child is already divinely intelligent. And actually, the more we think about what our inner child was inclined to do, so who we were at a very young age, is quite a bit like our higher self representation. We already had that freedom built into us. We already had that curiosity. We already knew certain things we're inspired to do and other things we don't feel as much of an affinity for. And that's okay. And that's what we need to learn to accept even as adults throughout life. Not to repress the unique parts of us that nobody else can understand, but to find ways of introducing that into a safe experience where we can just be ourselves without any expectation that we need to be any other way. So that's a big part of it. And so the real important part is that parents need to be educated. It starts from both ends of the spectrum. So without conscious parenting, we can't really have, conscious children, but the parents need to learn how to heal their trauma to not enforce all that same conditionality on their children. And so that's why I feel we need like a reboot of education from all dimensions of the experience, where people really learn themselves and learn the nature of the self and how easily manipulated it is, to understand how important it is to create a real boundary condition around the authentic essence. Because if that is this rock solid part of you, then nothing can tear down those boundaries. You won't even tolerate any mistreatment, any external manipulation, any gaslighting. Like, that's how the empath and the naturally sensitive soul can learn to be a warrior in reality, and not be kind of crushed by all the other conditions that can enter the scene, because they're just adhering to what they know is the right value system that needs to be shared around the world. It's a big part of it, I think.
Yeah. And I've heard you say that the soul's journey is to experience every different archetype. I'm wondering if there's any of these primordial archetypes that we are meant to all experience as a soul. And how would you lay out which are those different ones that people are living out, so they can understand and have more of a grasp on what these archetypes entail, what the soul is learning through choosing that archetype? You mentioned like the narcissistic archetype. What others are there out there? How many even do we know that exist? How many archetypes are there? That would be like a really interesting segue into that.
Mm-hmm. What a great question. Yeah, this is something that I go down a lot of rabbit holes personally pursuing, because if we get into that highest standpoint of how to create the experience of oneness, we need to really understand every single one of the archetypes. And any archetype that exists is a part of us. Because if we're all fractals of that oneness, then we can learn from every individual archetype, and there's so many of them. That any pantheon in any culture, historically speaking, could be the Egyptian pantheon, the Roman, the Greek, the Slavic pantheon. Like, every single pantheon has certain gods and goddesses, and each are fractal representations of the stages of the masculine and feminine's evolution. And they're all actually kind of symbiotic, and they all correspond across every culture, which is incredibly interesting to see the similarities of how archetypally it's the same energies taking shape. And there aren't like thousands of them. There's maybe up to like several hundred of the main ones, but the ones that we mostly associate with are probably several dozen. Like,
Yeah,
you mentioned the meditation. That's right. 12 is a big number that shows up. In Egypt, there's the zodiacs. That's a huge one too. Absolutely. So it's almost like thinking about, let's take like a dodecahedron, like a 12-faced geometric form. And we each have one of these facets, so these 12 major archetypes, or these 12 zodiacs. So when, for example, the celestial bodies, they kind of put us in this energized state of feeling the influence of these different planets corresponding. It's like that dodecahedron, like a dice, is rolled so that we are illuminated in one of those facets that we experience internally. And collectively, that dice is rolled, the 12-sided dice is rolled, so that all of us experience the same kind of energetic influences. And typically, that's how these historical events ensue, which a lot of people are saying, like, this time in history is one of those times it's going to get cathartic, because the kind of energies that are now coming into the scene, which at the time we're recording this, like end of October, like, things are about to get more intense.
For Scorpio energy out here.
The Scorpio energy, there's some Mars energy, there's some Pluto energy. This is a very disruptive kind of energetic influence. And so we're going to feel a lot coming up to the surface, a lot of more feelings evoked, and a lot of things happening externally to make us really see the inner confrontation that these energies are illuminating. So we all have these archetypes, and a lot of people feel like, let's say one day they're feeling, oh, this divine mother energy, this perfect neutrality. They're feeling this, their heart is just exploding in energy and they feel so peaceful. And then the next day it could be like the exact opposite. Either they turn on the news and they receive some of the energy from an external stimulus, or they just feel energetically something's off, something's bugging them. It could be a part of their shadow that needs to be integrated, which the external influence of the energetic bodies is helping them to uncover. So these kind of this dice of different energetic archetypes is constantly being turned, and we're never in a totally consistent archetypal part of our nature. And that's really important to recognize, because that helps us understand the nature of oneness. If all of us collectively are feeling the same energetic influences, then the degree to which these influences really impact us has to do a lot with our openness and our ability to surrender, to move with the energy. Or if we resist it, we create inner chaos. So that's how whatever influence comes into our individual field, it's either going to create more peace or more chaos. And whenever there's chaos, we need to understand that we're not allowing the energy to effectively come through in an unobstructed way, because these energies are really meant to heal. They're meant to align. If it's stirring up chaos, that means that you're internally trying to revolt against the energetic influence, which is bringing you alignment. So the way that I often see and talk about it is like, imagine like this cascade of energy coming through the crown chakra, like this beautiful waterfall of information. And if it were to flow through unobstructedly, you would feel it's hitting every single one of your chakras. It's flowing through your entire body. It's actually giving you some kind of a download, perhaps new information, new visions, new intentions. It might make you inclined to make certain changes happen, because the standstill is something that's definitely not encouraged when you're receiving a lot of new information. And so if you were to correspond with that energy, you would just flow with it. You would embody the state of letting yourself be as one with that flow. And that's part of that feminine experience, which is not choosing to be this revolutionary with your mind and try to figure out, well, do I want to align with this flow or not? But instead, you're simply allowing yourself to be it. And that creates little to no resistance as far as even making certain changes happen, like moving or changing jobs or, switching up certain things in your life. It's natural to evolve with this process. And a lot of people are really realizing if they felt like they could control their life, they can't anymore. And that's a biggie, because if you want to control constantly, if you want things your way, if you want to control your kingdom, your affairs, everything that you think that you are fully in control of, the universe wants to kind of challenge you on that assumption. And if you're willing to let go of that harsh control mechanism, then life becomes a lot easier. And maybe you realize that you find more control by letting go of it, or you find more connection through detachment. So you're attaching to a higher level version of what the energy is inspiring you to do and to be. And that's the experience that we're really kind of falling up to embrace. Hence that connection to this ascension energy, because it's pulling you upward. It's making you detach from this lower level instincts and the fears and all the attachment mechanisms. They're all based on thinking you need to have more or control more in order to experience internal safety. When in reality, safety is found through letting go and through surrender and through trusting that if you allow your higher self to orchestrate your reality, you'll find so much more freedom and peace by allowing that to happen. And so that's really the bliss of choosing to flow with it.
Yeah. What archetype is most needed right now as we're entering a new year, a new cycle? People ending off the year, the energies are going to be, I believe, cranked up a little bit in the intensity, especially with the upcoming election and all the other things in the external world that are going on. Out of that dodecahedron, what archetypes do you think, or maybe there's one in specific or a few, that are most needed to move through these energies that we're going through?
I feel like I need to meditate on that one. It's very interesting to think about one archetype, because the way that I see it is everybody's higher self is an archetype. Everybody's got their own archetype, because think about it. What do you individually need to create the complementary energy, to create an experience of oneness? If you've been kind of retroactively speaking in this Luciferian energy, then maybe the archetype that you need to ruminate on and to adopt is this kind of divine mother energy. It could be any archetype that resonates with your soul, that your heart feels inspired to come into alignment with, but it's going to be something divine motherly. It's going to be like a lighter energy, something that's very loving, very integrative and open. If you've been in a subdued passive energy and you've been afraid of stepping into your power, you need something pretty heavy hitting. You need some like Athena energy, some fiery, powerful kind of goddess of war and wisdom energy in order to create that cohesiveness in your field, to decide to take the next steps. That's an archetype that I feel very closely connected to personally. If
Right
you've
now,
been
or
throughout
in
my
general?
entire life,
Yeah.
for all of time, it's been kind of this archetype my soul's connected to. But everybody has their own archetype, and that's part of the mystery of discovering who you really are, is being able to feel into, through even the understanding of your natal chart, what is your soul communicating to and through you based on how these different energetic bodies, depending on when you were born, where you were born, who you are as a personality, and thinking about across the array of all these different traits, what do you need to show up in your most powerful version of self? And it really helps to look at all these different things. I always recommend for people to go on that journey to understand the inner mapping of their soul and decode how they're showing up. Take a Myers-Briggs test, find out your human design, look at your natal chart. This is something that if every child in school would learn to analyze, if every school had like an astrologer in addition to a guidance counselor, I think that would be very cool for kids to understand. This is who I am. This is how I can show up in a more soulful way and proactively pursue my soul's calling and deeper inclinations to be true and real. So that's a big part, is understanding if these are the different underlying aspects of self that need to be embraced. Are you letting that happen? Or are there certain things that you're choosing not to fully adopt, which are lessons that have yet to be learned? So yeah, everybody needs to figure out their archetype. But the higher self, in and of itself, like I said, if the ultimate archetype is source consciousness, which is like a universal energetic body of oneness, and we all have our different way of thinking about what is the energy of source, but it's unitive. The point is that it's coming to a convergence point which does not judge, does not separate, that loves, integrates, and holds space for every single part of the human and non-human experience. So the archetype that allows us to connect to that higher wisdom of source will be something that is similar in quality, but perhaps has a unique way of pursuing that mission here on earth. So it's your way of bringing that information. For some people, it's going to be very communicative. They're going to want to speak about it. They're going to feel like they need to communicate more to creatively impart some of this mission through what they can birth, physical contributions of sorts. For other people, it's going to be something that they need to just feel into so deeply that they become healers, or they find a way to transmute the energy in different ways, both for themselves and for other people. So yeah, the archetypes is just part of understanding also your unique calling. And there's different ways of grasping that, but it's very important to just feel into what is the nature of your own higher self. And my book goes really deeply into that as well, just trying to understand by communicating with this text, which is really about, that's a living body of knowledge that my higher self kind of brought into the picture for other people to unlock the power of their higher self, which is similarly accessible. It's a certain frequency. And the most interesting thing that I've heard from people reading my book is that they literally feel it viscerally. I don't know how you experience it. I'd be curious to hear, but they actually feel it inside their body, like it's working on them and it's allowing them to understand where they're not open to receiving the energy of the higher self, which is that universal aspect that's kind of like performing psychic surgery to open up any energetic blockages and allowing the information that's needed to create a high frequency form of existence. So that's the key. And that's the archetype that we need. And it's a combination of all the elements. It's the fire, the water, the earth, the air, the ether. It's synonymous with any other archetypal themes that we want to enforce into our reality. And most people would very easily be able to identify, if you just ask yourself the question, what am I missing? What element is not currently integrated into my life? Am I missing the fire energy? Am I afraid of that fire inside of me? Do I want to flow with the water? Or am I afraid? Am I creating an inner drought because I'm too focused on stubbornly conforming to the physical aspects? And can we come up to the point where we're literally etherically living our existence, where we're choosing to constantly be like 1 foot in, 1 foot out of the matrix, is kind of how I call it, and be so connected to the astral realm that we're even receiving in our dream state. And we're constantly feeling into the nature of the higher self and sustaining this dialogue, which never really ends. It's constant. You can have an all day, all night conversation with the higher self, with those different parts of you, and understanding why your reality is unfolding in the way that it is, and then influencing it as such, which only comes through the understanding that you are creating this feedback loop. And if you honor the role of the higher self, it keeps evolving to support whatever it is that you're really meant to be experiencing.
What's super interesting about a book like yours that is coming directly from your higher self is, and we've mentioned that the higher self is outside of space and time. So a lot of the concepts and the messages that came through, that are coming through in that book, I'm still going through it because it is very densely packed. And I feel like these are the types of books that are not a one sitting type of book. They're like this companion for you because this wisdom is timeless. And I'm really curious to feel into what you believe is one of these timeless messages that your book is leaving behind for not only the current generation, but the future generations that are going to come and find this book, find this message, find whatever you're bringing through and creating into the world. What is that timeless piece of wisdom that will never go out of style, never go out of date?
Well, I think it's got to come back to the nature of falling up. So the way that it's described in there is that it's about the art of aligning with your higher self, learning to hold space for reality that's being reverse engineered in real time, if you will. It's a very trippy way of thinking about it, but it creates this multidimensional experience where you're always open. You're always open to assimilating new energy, new information, understanding the why, and seeing that everything is really existing on this continuum of information through time and space, because it's actually unbound by time and space if you look at it through the lens of the soul. So the way it was written, and to be honest with you, I don't even see it as like my book. I have sometimes trouble saying that because it doesn't really feel like my book. Like when I open it, even sometimes like before this call, I had to remind myself. I literally opened it up and I read a few pages and I thought, whoa, okay, so that's the energy I was in when it was being written, when it was coming through me. Because I felt like I was mothering the book, if that makes sense. I was literally birthing it. It was coming through me in this way where I entered this kind of motherly field myself. And I was just trying to nurture the energy and to let it come out the way that it wanted and needed to. And it felt extremely important that it come out at that time and in that way, and down to like when it came out, it felt extremely significant. So the whole point of it is to allow people to not seek outside of themselves, because that's the main issue that I've seen in general in the world. Like people are confused about where to begin. Where is this journey taking them? Where do they get information? They want to join a cult or find a teacher to revere, or they're buying a million different books. And it's like the healing journey never ends, but I don't think it needs to be about healing. It needs to be about awakening yourself radically to this higher purpose and living with deep intention, and finding that everything that you thought you needed to heal was really just waking you up to a different dimension of the experience. And so it's all about quantum jumping in a very deep and intentional way, and understanding how you're a part of this living matrix, and everything that you've been going through is significant on the universal scale. And that's why even the nature of these masculine and feminine energy dynamics, they're so universal. And you start to understand really through the mastery of energy and interchange and what consciousness is experiencing through you, that as you're allowing yourself to let go of this egoic construct, you're literally allowing evolution to ensue through you. And your awareness of that helps you see how it plays out in other people. You gain kind of an awareness of even why people maintain that pain. You're allowing yourself to forgive those that previously you thought can't be forgiven. You see a bit of yourself in all of them. And it creates such a deeply humbling experience of just appreciating the nature of life and why we're here. And a part of that too is not being so attached to why we're here. It's like really a temporary journey in order to make the most meaning. And so what I've personally found is that it creates really deep meaning and a very deep connection to each and every moment, this kind of sacred union with life itself. And it comes alive in a unique way. So many times, even while it was coming through, like, it made me so emotional. Like even doing the speech to text transcription of it, like I would be moved. I would cry sometimes because it's so incredibly hard expanding that that's really the nature of the experience. If you're not feeling that deep emotion, what are you even doing here? Like life is meant to be felt. It's meant to be experienced inside and out. And if you lack feeling, you lack empathy, you lack that bit of God appreciating existence through you. And so it's very multifaceted and truly deep. So every time it's taken in, or even if it's like a certain part, a certain chapter that somebody's drawn to, I feel it can be used almost as a divination tool of sorts. Like whatever your soul needs to integrate, open up to that part and it'll help you see a part of you that needs to be integrated more deeply. So that's the way that I really like surrender to allow it to be written through me, because I felt like if I can leave behind something that allows people to entangle with the awareness of their own higher self without me physically being there, that's the biggest gift that I can leave behind to humanity. And so that's kind of what I wrote in the dedication page. Like, this
Yeah,
is a
you
gift to
dedicate it to
humanity.
humanity. That's so beautiful.
Yeah, I didn't feel there could be any other way to go about it. It's for the collective, and anybody that wants to get to the next level, I believe this will help them. So that's yeah, that's what my soul felt is most needed for this time, for us all to learn to be stewards of consciousness and to heal enough to pick up the baton and to take it to the next level ourselves.
Well, let's do this if you're open to it, because I know you have the physical copy right there in front of you.
Yeah.
If we can use it as a divination tool, maybe to tune in for a message that might need to come through for people as we're closing out 2024, going into the next year. Let's open up a random page and see what needs to be shed light on that's already in the book. Would you be down to do that?
Yeah, that's a cool idea. Okay, let me feel into it for a second. Okay, so for the collective, for our viewers, for everybody that's tuning into this, and for the world, what is the main theme that we need to feel into and access to fall up into our collective higher octave of consciousness? All right, here we go. Page 180 from the chapter on the quest for purpose. Interestingly connected to what I was just talking about. The crucial point is that awareness is not a definitive factor, and it can change at any given time. Due to your underlying intentions that prescribe value to your awareness, it picks up whatever connotation you energetically imbue in it, becoming stagnant or limiting only if you treat it in such a manner. Given that it represents the focus and level of consciousness you bring into life, awareness can be seen as the seed that activates all the changes you experience. The way we look at reality denotes our awareness. It is the invisible lens through which we observe everything that becomes visible to us. Knowing that you can change your awareness to see a different reality unfold before your eyes, including your role as a part of that reality, you can find tremendous purpose in shaping your awareness to become the happiest and most purposeful version of yourself. Anyone acutely aware of the power of their awareness feels tremendous purpose afforded to them through any situation, since they realize that they play an active role in developing all the events unfolding in their life. Therefore, seeking purpose is like seeking the pair of glasses you're always wearing but choosing not to see through clearly. To seek the state of being purposeful is to be ignorant of the opportunity that is already yours by failing to realize that energy could be invested into feeding your purpose at all times. The key difference between seeking purpose and experiencing it is that in the latter case, that purpose makes you feel a certain way. The only way we can know for sure if we're living purposefully is if we have achieved the deep contentment of allowing ourselves to be balanced by the output in our lives, generated by a beautiful input we can appreciate from within. The feeling of purpose is a certain feeling of ease, a flow that we would not want to take away from ourselves, even if we had the opportunity to do things differently, which we of course do. That was a perfect page from beginning paragraph to the end. How about that? So I think that's extremely corresponding to everything we just talked about regarding purpose. We have to arouse that deep purpose, and we have to feel in order to figure out what our purpose is. So for a lot of people right now, they're being rattled up by these energies, but they feel maybe some degree of complacency. Maybe they're not sure, okay, what do I do to feel more passionate about my existence? And so we have to bring purpose into the equation. If you had to change something to live in the way that you literally wouldn't want to change anything else about your life, or sometimes what I tell people when they're feeling fear or apprehension regarding a shift in consciousness or splits on planet Earth, is like, this is almost like approaching a moment of that past version of you dying. You're transitioning to a higher state of your own consciousness. If you were to physically die, would you do anything differently right now? Or would you live the same way? If you would be living the same exact way, then there's literally nothing to fear, because you're just transitioning into that higher state of being where you're realizing either you've been choosing alignment or not. And that's going to be made even more apparent to you with time. So that's the goal, to really understand if we're not feeling that alignment, then our purpose is to create it. And now's the time. There's no excuses. And hopefully this as a tool can help people realize what they need to pinpoint internally is making them fear the creation of that alignment. Certain big changes perhaps that need to be made, which they feel has not been up to them, maybe up until now, or something else, where their purpose, which maybe they haven't been wanting to emphasize, is now really the most important thing to do.
And that passage started off speaking into the awareness and the choice of being aware of what world we want to see. And a lot of fear can be brought up if we're like, oh, there's going to be all this destruction, all this chaos, all this collapse. But if you maintain yourself in this awareness of what is the world that I want to see bring about, then that reality will be exposed to you naturally, because it's the awareness, the conscious observer, that determines reality. So that was a perfect passage, and I love that you can use a book as a divination tool as well. So as you know, Gabi, we end every show with a segment called the final trio. Before getting into that, where would you send people to connect with your work, connect with you? Where can they grab a copy of Falling Up and anything else that you have going on in your life that's on your heart to share?
Yeah, so you can find more information about me on my website, gabikovalenko.com, where you can find the information about the book and anything else that I have going on. Also, my YouTube channel is a consistent place where you can find new downloads, new information to prepare us all for what I feel energetically is coming our way. I post on Instagram every day, so lots of good stuff on there. And yeah, the book can be found in major retailers, or on Amazon is probably the easiest place. There's also an audiobook, and some people are just going for the audiobook. Some people have asked me what's the best way to take it in. And it was really meant to be depending on your learning style. So some people are kind of auditory learners. They like to hear through listening. But just a note for those of you that are into the audiobooks, it's very important to create a sacred space when you're taking in this information. Some people are listening to it while they're in the car, they're walking their dog, and this is some deep material. So just
At the gym.
Right, on the treadmill. So just a little bit of advice.
But the gym's a sacred place. I'm gonna give you that. The gym is a sacred place.
It sure is. It can be a sacred place. But if maybe you're in it for the gym, then maybe listen to round 2 when you're at home and you're in that aloneness, so that you can allow that awareness to really solidify. That might be a good idea. So yeah, the point is that it's something that's meant to be like kind of studied as this term in terms of self-inquiry for your own soul. It's not the awareness that's meant to give you that feedback. You're not really taking it in per se. It's more of a mirror for your own consciousness. So if you're ready to go really deep, then it's probably for you as a mirror to take it to the next level. Yeah, and I also wanted to say something to your last point. You made it some really deep points about awareness and just kind of the nature of how to integrate it. A lot of people are feeling like a lot of anger is coming up, a lot of fear, a lot of these conditions, like you said, deep resistance is coming up. And one thing I really want to emphasize is that those emotions right now are actually extremely beneficial if they're used as motivating factors to create higher level goals. Because in the seed of every destructive emotion is also exactly what's needed to turn it from a weapon into that gift of that divine intelligence. So a lot of people are aggravated by things that they really need to create positive change surrounding, to transform it. And so if you're sitting in an idle energy of feeling certain things or being aggravated, then there's really an opportunity to transmute that anger into creative potential, or frustration into new potential that really you're experiencing because you're angry at yourself or the part of you that's feeling confined because of what's happening externally. But you need to let yourself get to that point of releasing the destructive emotion and becoming the new version of you that you really need to receive the information regarding. And so I feel that's a very pivotal part about this transition, that a whole new archetype has been illuminated for so many people. And it's a new personality. It's a new version of them that maybe they're not used to embodying. So they need to create space for that to come through. And whatever's needed is a part of that experience. So I just want to make that as a side note about falling up is not just about, let's just fly up to this higher dimension. No, it's like a very multifaceted journey of understanding. If we have not been allowing that process, then we need to allow ourselves to go through the motions of inner understanding and transformation to really become that version of us that we always were meant to be. So it's not a one-size-fits-all journey or experience for sure.
Yeah, and knowing that any and all emotions have the potential to propel us into that next stage of evolution. Even anger, even rage, even grief, even deep sadness, all of these emotions, as you said. So it doesn't really matter what everyone is going through at this time, but what are we going through and how can we make the best of that going into this new year? Beautifully said, Gabi. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For the final trio, the first one I have is, in one of the chapters of the book, you left the reader with this following question, and now I'm going to leave it to you, which is, what does your soul want you to experience in your life going forward?
So my soul said, okay, you know what flow feels like. Now keep it that way. So basically, I know the feeling of being literally like swept away in the flow state to the point where, like I said, nothing can get in the way of that. It's a waterfall experience of becoming the energy. So my goal, I know, is to maintain openness for flow as much as possible, to not deviate from it. Because it's like one of those things. Once you know what it feels like, or once you've seen it, you can't unsee it, right? So once you've reached a certain peak experience of the bliss body activating or feeling that sheer alignment, or like some people experience when they've had a really deep psychedelic experience of unity consciousness, or they've been transformed through breath work or a meditation journey or something else. Now keep it that way. The point is to ground that peak experience of your consciousness into daily life and to see what happens when you hold space for that high frequency of your own nature. So I've really been pushed to just create the openness, follow the flow, make certain changes happen, allow myself to go through as many quantum jumps as I need to, sometimes on a daily basis. It happens regularly. You know, if you're open to flow, then you're constantly transfiguring into a higher and more open version of you. And so it's kind of about that pervasive openness. That's really the key word that I'd say. It begins with open-mindedness, being able to acknowledge that openness and freedom of evolution is possible, but it evolves into an openness on every aspect of the being, so that you're literally emotionally open to transformation, you're physically transforming, you're breathing in the new energy all the time, and you're letting it work its way down to the depths of your being. So that's my goal. And I think my soul's approving of me staying in that energy. So I'd say that's the key.
And it's like, if you got there once, if you opened your heart once, if you felt oneness, bliss once, that'll be available to you for the rest of your life because it already happened once. So
Bingo.
the second question is that I have for you, when was the last time you fell up in your life?
That's funny. I feel like we're answering the questions before you ask them to a certain degree, just like I talked about it before we read the book chapter. Maybe that's the nature of this conversation, to show people that it's kind of like reverse engineering itself.
It's not linear. And
It's
okay,
not linear.
Yeah, you'll be shocked when I ask you the next one.
Oh boy, here we go. I love it. So yeah, when was the last time I fell up? Well, would you be surprised if I said that the falling up doesn't stop? Like, just like you just said, once you start falling up, like, what are you doing if you're falling down? You're not trusting the process. So I don't want to say that it's consistent, like you're just always rising, you're always up leveling. And there's some days when you maybe you're at a standstill or you're integrating. That's what really the process of integration feels like. If you were falling up, so to speak, all the time, it would be like just impossible to be grounded in the human experience. It's important to integrate everything that you receive. So I'd say that the way that the journey feels is you receive new energy, new information, like the cosmic dice is tossed, you feel something new, you have to kind of assign value to that experience and allow yourself to conform to the energies at play. And then when that happens, you go through like a shifting, a recalibration internally. Okay, what's next? And then you're kind of fed the next storyline or the next thing that needs to be integrated so that you stay on this journey. But I found myself in a real sweet spot, I think, of just allowing for flow and cherishing that feminine experience. So I really safeguard that. And I feel like that's my sacred set point of just allowing for openness, freedom of expression, a lot of aloneness, a lot of introspective time so that I can feel, receive, rest, really be in that state of flow, which requires also a lot of rejuvenation, time in the sun, all kinds of things to just down to the cellular level, allow yourself to stay open. So for me, that's been like moving away from chaos, away from anything that doesn't feel like I can even be myself in that atmosphere to keep falling up.
Gabi, the last question for today is reflecting on what you said about what wisdom is coming through in the book. You said, I feel I've only been reverse engineering certain wisdom that you understand only fully with time. what is a piece of wisdom that you feel that humanity is only meant to understand in a future time? Like, we're kind of leaving a
Wow.
time capsule with this
Yeah,
question.
we're leaving a time capsule, aren't we? Last time we thought about the time capsule from a different standpoint. This is even
Yeah.
deeper. Well, then the deepest point of wisdom would be you knew it all along. You created it to be this way. I think that alone would catapult people to a new level of seeing their reality. Because every single thing you might feel at odds with, you created for yourself. And to let that sink in is so cathartic because it dissolves that resistance. It makes you realize that if your higher self already knew, you would have the power to get over it, to make the most of it. If you chose your family, you chose the circumstances, you chose the challenges and everything else, even the way that you physically and emotionally express right now, down to your DNA, then that's potential you're choosing. You're choosing that space of opportunity, like I spoke to earlier. You're choosing to learn that you have free will. You're choosing to realize that you had it all along. That's actually why you fell into this state of amnesia, to recover your power. That's the most beautiful part of the experience. That if you already are readying yourself to come back to the realization of who you were and who you always were meant to be, you're tapping into that higher self as that future you. And it makes it so much easier because that builds up that trust. And I really feel that's the missing ingredient for so many people. A lot of people tell me, how do I channel, or how do you channel? Because I can't possibly channel. How do I become connected to a higher self when I have no idea how to relate to that? That's $1 million question. And I can't emphasize that anymore because most people, they think there are select individuals that can do it and they cannot. And that's what needs to be shattered as an illusion. And that's part of what I feel has been creating the split in this world. That the way civilization has been set up is to separate people from their innate power and the power of their consciousness. Because if all would simultaneously wake up to the power of their awareness, their free will, their ability to change what they feel can't be changed, it would be the disruptive kind of nuclear bomb to set the collective free. Everyone would choose differently that isn't experiencing the bliss state of freedom and love and unity. And so at the same time, a lot of people aren't choosing that because they're afraid to, or they think that they aren't ready. So if we were to red pill ourselves into creating that opportunity, it comes down to that, to realizing that that's why you're here. And if you're suffering, you're literally just depriving yourself of the opportunity that you signed up for and created for yourself. So people are not ready to realize that until they later go through it. So typically, it's sometimes people even tell me, if you would have told me that a few years back, I would have no idea what you're talking about. I would reject it and I would hate you for even trying to project that onto me. But now it's like I'm a part of their soul telling them that this is real and that they knew it all along.
Wow. You need to take a deep breath after that. Gabi Kovalenko, it's so beautiful to witness your growth. You are a light to humanity.
Thank you.
I am so pleased to be able to guide these conversations, that so much is coming through, that I know even episodes like these are time capsules that I will need to continue going back to throughout my life. And it's just such a gift. Thank you for owning your truth. Thank you for owning your authenticity and finding a way to create that divine balance within you, because you're being a permission slip for anyone that is seeing you, that is witnessing you, that is hearing you and holding space for you. And we have you in our hearts. And I am so excited to see the continuation of this journey for you, and for the 5 million more books that you're going to write in your life. So I'm excited.
I hope to punch out at least a few more. We'll see how it goes. This one, it needs some time to integrate. It's like people need to take this one in, and then we'll expand the journey, falling higher, I suppose. Just there's no limit to how high you can fall up, right? So we'll keep going and see where it takes us. It's a collective journey. So I feel like I'm going through it with everybody else, and we're all contributing to it, which is why people that take in this awareness, they're like going through the collective shift all together. And I'm blessed to be able to facilitate it for so many people. And thank you so much for inviting me a second time to fall higher together. I feel like we definitely cranked it up a notch. The sky's the limit when it comes to this kind of awareness.
I can't even imagine the next one. We just keep going down or up.
Right. Exactly. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you for playing your part in the collective awakening, for holding space for somebody like me to go so deep. I truly appreciate that. And you're definitely following up as well. And it's noticeable and it's very admirable. So keep it up.
Thank you. Always, always.